Volume 2, there's verse 29.
All right, remember in our timeline, Moses talked about Deuteronomy, how the land and the people will return will come back. And so right now we're going to head into the 90s. The Soviet Union has collapsed, Berlin Wall has fallen, and Jewish people are trying to get home from all around the world. Psalm 107, verse 2, let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he hath redeemed from the hand of the enemy, and gathered them out of the land from the east, and from the west, from the north, and from the south. We talked about last week about the Ethiopian Jews. Do you remember that? We talked about Operation Elijah, and Operation Moses, and Operation Joshua, and now in 1991 it's Operation Solomon. Operation Solomon, during a 33-hour period, more than 14,000 Ethiopian Jews were airlifted from the capital of Addis Ababa to Israel. And I have a video that kind of encapsulates all these operations together and puts everything in perspective. So let's go to that.
In 1978, a letter arrives in Israel. It sparks a modern exodus.
One of them somehow managed to send a letter to Israel saying, we are here in Sudan, we are stranded, we need your help. Help us.
The plea comes from an unlikely source. Fleeing famine, civil war, and religious persecution in their homeland, a desperate cry for help reveals a lost community of Jews in Ethiopia.
We walked for more than 3 weeks in order to get to Sudan.
The Ethiopian Jews claim to be one of the original 12 tribes of Israel, lost for 2,000 years in Africa.
When the Israelis decided that the Ethiopians were indeed Jews, one of the 12 lost tribes of Israel, they realized that they're going to have to smuggle 20,000 people out of East Africa, a region almost universally hostile to Israel. It was an almost impossible task.
Israel assembles a team to work undercover, outwit dictators, and overcome a civil war to rescue the lost tribe.
I was on my way in a helicopter when the pilot told me that he had a message from Jerusalem saying that he should do a U-turn and go straight to Jerusalem. The Prime Minister wants to see you.
This is the story of how a British businessman, a Mossad spy, and a seasoned diplomat risked everything to save the forgotten Jews. For 2,000 years, Jews had lived in Ethiopia.
In the mid-70s, there was a revolution in Ethiopia and civil war, and the Jews, many of them fled to Sudan.
Having escaped civil war in their homeland, the Jews are stuck in appalling refugee camps. In Sudan, their religion makes life even harder.
You couldn't say that you are Jew, otherwise they would get, afraid of you. My sister, they burned her clothes that were hanged on the rope.
News of their desperate plight reaches Israel.
And one of them somehow managed to send a letter to Israel saying, we are here in Sudan, we are stranded, we need your help, help us.
Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin decides to act.
Begin was himself a refugee. He fled from the Nazis in Poland during the Second World War, leaving his family, unfortunately, to suffer their fate in the Holocaust. And since then, he's become convinced that Israel must do everything it can to help Jews when they're in trouble. So when his letter turns up, he knows he must do everything he can to save the Ethiopian Jews.
Begin turns to his secret service, the Mossad.
The Prime Minister, he called the chief of the Mossad And they told him, we have this news about Jews in Sudan. Bring me the Jews of Ethiopia out of Sudan. Now, how do you take them out? Because Sudan is an Arab country, enemy, member of the Arab League.
With official relations between Israel and Sudan blocked, Mossad need a way to work covertly. They approach a then little-known Manchester businessman. He receives a phone call he never expected.
When I received the telephone call, our substitute was here in 15 minutes to them. When I heard this story, I canceled my appointment. And we discussed. They wanted me to involve because of my trade on cotton.
David is an unlikely savior of the Ethiopian Jews. At 13, he had left school to become a market trader in his native Iran. 5 years later, in search of his fortune, he moved to Manchester, setting up a series of successful textile companies.
The Israelis approached David Alliance because he was a business office that the Mossad agents were able to plan their rescue operation.
Using David's office to travel in and out of Sudan, Mossad discovered a perfect place close to the refugee camps to carry out the evacuation. Gad Shimron is recruited to help run it.
I went down to Sudan as a member of the operating team of the new holiday village, Arus, 40 kilometers from Port Sudan. It allowed you to go around the country and to drive to Port Sudan and bring tourists and go out at night and day whenever you want, actually with your rubber boats, because you bring in tourists to the unique diving spots of Sudan.
Create a plan. They will pick up Jewish refugees at confidential meeting points, rendezvous with the Israeli Navy offshore, and then escort the Jews to Israel.
We had what we call the committee members. Committee members were young Jewish boys in the camps who were our contact liaison people. In case we said, tomorrow, 20 hours or 8 p.m., 200 people at the quarry 10 kilometers south of the refugee camp. And we would come with our trucks, pick them up, drive through the police control and army control. Usually we have done it smoothly by bribing our way through.
In the 1980s, relations between Israel and Sudan were tense. The Sudanese have strong ties with their Arab neighbors. Rumors of Jewish refugees leaving to Israel alert the Sudanese to a potential Mossad plot. They shut the borders to Ethiopian Jews. The rescue now hinges on whether the Israelis can find a way to reopen the border.
What they needed was a trusted middleman with good business contacts and enough political clout to influence senior Sudanese officials. There was only really one candidate.
At that point, I was asking Jane to go in and help, which I did.
Again, David needs to keep his real motives hidden for the ministers to meet him. Once more, he uses his Sudan office and arrives under the pretense of a trade mission.
It was in 1984 when I went to Sudan, and the aim was to buy cotton, and at the same time, through that, to try and help to bring the Jews out.
The ministers he meets are unwilling to open the border or allow any Israeli activity until David comes across an official who studied in his adopted city of Manchester.
He gave a cocktail party that night, and another gathering the next day, and I met some people who were able to help me to open the door again for the Ethiopian to move, which was very satisfying.
David is introduced to several influential ministers. They are persuaded by his requests and reopen the borders. News spreads in Ethiopia that the escape route to Israel is open again. Increasing numbers begin to make the hazardous journey.
We left the village at night because we were escaping from the authorities in Ethiopia. It's about 800 kilometers. We walked for more than 3 weeks in order to get to Sudan.
There are many dangers on the road.
There were robbers stopping us and asking for money. Otherwise, they will kill us, and we were in the middle of nowhere.
In Sudan, they are put in temporary camps, rife with disease.
We realized we were going to stay in that desert, live in tents for many months, maybe years.
14,000 Jews leave their homes in Ethiopia. Many do not complete the journey, and thousands succumb to epidemics in the camps. Around 6,000 people die or disappear.
They say that there is no family that got in Sudan and didn't lose one of her members.
To get the Jews out of Sudan, Gad and his Mossad team need a new plan that bypasses the heavily armed Sudanese coast.
So why not to land Israeli Air Force C-130 transport airplanes in the desert and bring in the Jews and fly them directly to Israel? Sounds crazy. We tried it. It worked once and twice.
At this stage, the Jews were being smuggled out in relatively small numbers every couple of weeks on military C-130 transport planes. It was a tried and tested method that had been used a few years earlier to rescue Israeli hostages from Entebbe in Uganda. But when word spread around the world that a terrible natural disaster had hit the region, they realized they're going to have to speed things up. They're going to need bigger planes.
In a year, 1 million people died from one of the worst famines to blight Africa.
It was now a race against time to save the Jews before they died of hunger. And to do this, Israel asked the United States to intervene. After secret talks with the president, Nimeri, a deal was done. He will turn a blind eye as long as the operation is kept secret, not only from his Arab allies, but also for his own people. It's this that allowed the Israelis to begin to plan a mass airlift.
6,000 refugees are stranded in the camps and need to be airlifted to safety. Considered a modern exodus, this mission is named Operation Moses. The US, Israel, and Sudan put the final details together. The operation takes place in a total blackout. Sudan's allies cannot know it's assisting Israel. A Belgian aviation company fly via Europe.
The Jews were taken from the refugee camps in military convoys, actually. Because I mean, the Sudan soldiers didn't know. And then I thought those are refugees being evacuated to Europe. Were taken to Khartoum International Airport, flown to Europe, and from Europe straight to Israel. Sometimes, you know, the airplane would only touch and go in Athens, you know, change call number and continue to Israel. In a short period of 7 weeks, over 6,000 Jewish refugees were airlifted out of Sudan.
With a few days remaining before all the Jews in the camps can be evacuated, the story breaks.
The news was spread on the radio, on the international radio and media and TV. And Numeri, of course, had to say, "Oh, I didn't know, I stopped it." And that was the end of Operation Moses.
Baba Ramdev is one of India's most famous yoga gurus, but now he's using his name in a very different industry, selling everything from noodles to shampoo. It's been called India's fastest growing consumer goods company, so it's more than just a gift. Joining you
It's here on BBC World News as Spain decides. 2015 is nearly over, but can the European champions Barcelona cap off another extraordinary year by winning the...
With rescue from Sudan no longer possible, the Israeli government focused on the remaining Jews trapped in Ethiopia. From 1985 until 1990, Israeli efforts to negotiate with the dictator of Ethiopia failed.
Ethiopia's dictator was Colonel Mengistu, known as the Butcher of Addis Ababa, because he came to power in a military coup in 1977. In fact, it was rumored that he had personally suffocated the former emperor, Haile Selassie, with a pillow. Now, this was the time of the Cold War, and for most of the 1980s, Mengistu was fighting a civil war with military aid from the Soviet Union. And in return, he's agreed to expel not only all US diplomats, but those of their allies, including Israel. By 1990, the Soviet Union is no longer in a position to give him military aid, so he turns to Israel as a way of building bridges with the United States. He offered Israel the chance to resume relations.
The Israeli Prime Minister seizes the opportunity. He turns to a trusted emissary and a former ambassador to Ethiopia.
I was on my way in a helicopter when the pilot told me that he had a message from Jerusalem saying that he should do a U-turn and go straight to Jerusalem. The Prime Minister wants to see you. And I was, as it were, whisked into the Prime Minister's office.
Mengistu sets his price. He wants weapons, but Uri is ordered to obey a US arms embargo on the Ethiopian regime. So the negotiations come down to money. The Jews become hostages.
So my question was, how much? He shot at me a figure, 180 million. I was absolutely stunned, but I said, you're joking.
After months of hopeless negotiation, the government of Israel turned once more to David Alliance, by now an influential millionaire.
I offered to take the production of the textile for a whole year. I offered to put up a new factory there. I did everything. I tried very hard without success. So all the ministers. Then we were invited to go to see the president.
By now, Mengistu is losing the civil war. He has become desperate and paranoid.
Suddenly, so the guns is aiming at us through the curtain. President, give me all, you can have the Jews. And I said to him, Mr. President, you must accept that they're all going to be in your own, but you can make your life easier financially. He didn't say no to it. We started talking and negotiating, and we got his agreement.
A personal payment to Mengistu is agreed, and he orders his government to set a lower price for the Jews. Uri can now finalize his payment. Talks progress until news arrives of a problem.
I get up one morning and I'm told by this Ethiopian who was my contact, I'm sorry, Mr. Mengistu, he fled to Zimbabwe, taking all his group to Zimbabwe. So we have nobody to negotiate. That was for me a very unpleasant news.
When Mengistu fled, the country was in chaos. Meanwhile, Uri Labrani was still talking to what remained of the government in the hope of striking a deal. He finally made a take-it-or-leave-it offer.
Uri's closing offer is to pay the ministers what it would cost to transport each Ethiopian Jew to Israel. This is as high as he can go.
Still, the Ethiopian ministers hesitated. But with the rebels closing in and in need of money, they agreed to a price.
It was agreed to 35 million. A date was set. The conditions under which permission would be given were set down.
The mission is given the green light. Uri has to act quickly. The rebels are making their final approach on Addis Ababa. Uri has 5 days before they take the capital. On May 24th, 1991, the first plane lands. Santa is one of those to make the trip. She was just 8 years old.
Hearing about Jerusalem, I was told if we got there, all hardships would vanish because it was such a holy place. Suddenly, I heard a megaphone announcing that everyone who has the right papers should go to the embassy. We rushed so quickly, I didn't even have time to put on my shoes. I actually came to Israel barefoot.
35 military and civilian aircraft are assembled. They have just 25 hours to airlift over 14,000 people. The operation works at a lightning speed. Aircraft barely had time to refuel before flying on. 28 planes are in the air at the same time. 400 buses escort the newly arrived refugees to specially built centres in Israel. Years of planning are coming together. Halfway through the day, the Ethiopians derail the mass airlift.
I get news that the control tower of Addis Ababa is beginning to make difficulties for our planes to land. So I asked them to find out what's happening.
The Ethiopian government are nervous and demand Uri pay before the operation can continue. With the rebels fast approaching, time is running out, but no one knows the Ethiopian bank number. The finance minister had fled. Uri and the remaining Jews are stuck. He needs a miracle.
I asked for the person who is going to replace this Minister of Finance person. It so happened that I knew him when I was ambassador. I said, look, you know me, do you believe me that I, ambassador of Israel, would want to cheat you after a miserable $35 million? Take this phone your boss, the new prime minister, saying that you were satisfied that the money was ready in the account of Ethiopia. He phoned, the road opened up, and the last planes began to move out.
The planes are loaded with refugees. One is so full it has 1,088 people crammed on board. It remains a world record in aviation. The mission, dubbed Operation Solomon, is a success. Uri achieves what was unthinkable just a few years earlier. He rescues almost all of the Ethiopian Jews. After the euphoria of the rescue, in Israel, life isn't easy for the Ethiopian Jews. Racism, an unfamiliar society, and an educational gap make it a struggle for them to adapt.
When you see me, you know that I came from Ethiopia. And this is something too many people is not easy to accept. I think the fact that we came from such a different culture, a different part of the world, makes it not easy to learn the new way of life, to be integrated in one of the modern societies in the world.
Despite struggles integrating, the Ethiopian community maintain pride in their traditions. Central to them is their annual festival of Siged. It is a celebration that marks what they believe to be God's revelation to Moses. In Ethiopia, the community prayed to return to Jerusalem. Today they worship in the holy city itself.
Siged is a great festival. We want to celebrate that we are now in Jerusalem.
For Mahaleta and her fellow refugees, reaching their promised land was no easy task.
And to do this amazing journey, to risk so much in order to make it possible, so it is a miracle.
The rescue of the Ethiopian Jews was one of the great humanitarian acts of the 20th century, and one that probably could only have been pulled off by the Israelis. After the Holocaust, most Israelis were determined never to leave Jews to their fate again, whatever the difficulties and however far they had to go. It was an extraordinary act.
130,000 Ethiopian Jews now live in the Holy Land. Only a handful remain behind. David Gad and Uri were instrumental in creating an extraordinary modern exodus.
It doesn't happen to any ambassador. It just happens, and I'm very proud I was chosen to do that.
In risking their own lives, they have changed the lives of many.
I helped her family to come out. And a year or so later, she wrote me a letter. Said, I learned English in order to be able to write to you and thank you for helping my family. That gives you great satisfaction.
They rescued the forgotten Jews of Ethiopia against all the odds, helping them to fulfill their ancient dream of returning to Jerusalem.
I feel very proud being part of this operation, and I think it's the peak of my career in the Mossad. I've done many things, nothing compares to this, nothing.
Looking back on.
Isn't that amazing? God is working amazing ways. It is 9 o'clock. So I don't think I can top what we just saw. And so we'll continue on in 2 weeks. We talked about the Oslo Accord and the Jordan-Israeli Peace Accord. And then we're going to be closing in on present day. I have documentaries, short documentaries on Chinese Jews coming home, Indian Jews from India coming home, French. With the ISIS attacks, French are leaving in large numbers, and North American Jews are making their way back to Israel. So God is bringing them home from all 4 corners of the world, and I think you can see it here, right? And this is definitely one of the most dramatic of those of the Lord bringing His people home. Questions or comments? Let's close in prayer so you can go home. Dear Father, we thank you today. We thank you for your word, Lord. Lord, and again, we just see your hand throughout history, Lord, as you guide and direct, and Lord, as you fulfill your promises you made in Scripture, Lord. And Lord, you said you'll bring the chosen people from all 4 corners of the world back to the promised land. And Lord, it's happening. We get to see it, Lord. We thank you, Lord. May you bless your people as we go our separate ways. And you see. Yeah.
Next class, I think I'm 28 or 27.
Next class, 28.
28.
That'll be nice.